Hello, welcome, thanks for joining me. Let's spend a few minutes with Severance by Ling Ma. This book was originally published back in 2018, and I read a 2019 Picador edition electronically. So yeah, Severance by Ling Ma. This is a work of fiction, and it's often described as a satire or a social satire, and I didn't find it all that satirical. I didn't find it all that funny, although there are some amusing kind of parts in it. But it's also described as a social commentary, and I think that description really fits. A social commentary of late stage capitalism. Yeah, to me that really fits. And so later on in this chat, I'm going to talk a bit about what my takeaways about the commentary were. But for now, let's talk a bit about what it's about. So our main character's name is Candace Chen. She's a young woman, a millennial, I guess, a generation woman. And she, as the novel opens, she is discovered on a roadside in Pennsylvania in a New York City taxi cab by a band of survivors. And survivors, there's been a zombie-ish apocalypse that's just happened. Although it's not the chase you, scare you, eat you type of zombies. It's a different type of zombie. It is people suffering from something called Shin fever, which I will discuss more here in a bit. But so the book is not set linearly. It starts with this prologue with her being found on the side of the road with this Shin fever pandemic well underway. But then the next chapter takes us back really to the beginning. Our main character, Candace, is the daughter of Chinese immigrants. So part of the story goes back to her earlier days in childhood when she was a young girl with her parents as they sort of make their way in the United States, especially as seen through the experience of the mother who had a difficult time when they first came over, immigrated. Her father had a job, and so the mother didn't have a lot to do there for a while, and so we get that sort of picture of the immigrant experience. And then her parents pass away, and she ends up moving to New York City, where she doesn't have a lot of connection really to anything, and so she's sort of aimless. She moves there because her other college friends moved there, and it's one of these cities that draws people just based on its mythology. And so she explores the city by day and night, I guess. She wanders around the city taking photographs, just sort of aimlessly, of everyday situations in everyday life, and she posts them to a blog called New York Ghost. So but she doesn't think of herself as that good of a photographer, and so she gives it up after a while. Ultimately, she lands a job at a publishing house, and she is working on Bible publishing. This is a specialty publishing house that publishes like difficult to publish things, specialty publishing things that mostly require printing in China. And so she works on these Bibles, specifically one marketed towards, I guess, teenagers. But, so she's not real connected still, though, to anything. She does get a boyfriend, Jonathan, and he's one of these types that has decided to just drop out of really capitalism. He just works enough kind of freelance and by contract to pay the rent, and then he lives very frugally otherwise. And they maintain a relationship for quite some time. But then eventually this fever, Shin fever, starts to crop up. It originates in China, and it spreads then all over the world. And, New York, obviously, no exception. So people start to be infected by this. What it is, the symptoms of it are people will eventually get infected. They will just start doing some kind of activity over and over and over again, and they stop responding to any kind of external stimuli. They just do this activity, and eventually they don't eat, and they die, So that's basically the symptoms of the fever, and it starts to spread. So she's working for this publishing house in New York. Well, people start to leave New York, plus not to mention people getting infected. So the city starts this sort of slow sort of winding down, and she documents that. So the book describes this really well, of how this happens, how ultimately things like transit systems and things like that, ultimately decline and then ultimately break down. Her company winds up, because of the staffing issues they have with people trying to actually leaving New York or succumbing to the fever itself, the publishing house wants to continue operations, but is going to let everybody work from home except for a skeleton crew that will stay and man the main office there in New York. And so a small group then agreed to do that, and she's one of them. And so she stays, ultimately becoming one of the last ones in New York, and then she leaves. This is all in the prologue of when she gets found then on the side of the road. But she winds up, this band of survivors that she winds up connecting with, that's mentioned in the prologue of the book, is this very small group of survivors who are trying to make their way to a place called The Facility, and it's in the Chicago suburbs. So this takes them a while for this small band to make their way over to the facility in suburban Chicago. And this little small band of survivors is led by a person called Bob, who is sort of a authoritarian leader. He was a former IT guy, and he sort of seems to frame their experience in religious terms. So they do these activities called stalking, where they'll go to a house or something, or someplace to get supplies. They'll send a little advanced party in there to see if there's anybody infected in there. Shin fever, I should mention, these zombies are not mean. They don't interact with anybody at all. They just ignore people. So, they're safe to be around. So they will go and check out if there's if it's an alive situation where there are actually people still alive with the fever in this house or not. And, but before they do that, they have this sort of religious sort of ritual that they've developed. But anyway, so yeah, the facility, I'm not going to give away what that ultimately winds up being, because that would be a spoiler, but because it was something that I was real curious about for them to get to. But once they get there, things aren't really as they had been promised by Bob. Not exactly the same kind of situation that they and we, the reader, were expecting. So yeah, and then from there, the story continues, and I won't give anything away because I don't want to detract really from the reading of it. But so my thoughts about the social commentary aspect of it. Number one, Shin fever, the fever itself. So let's just recap. So for people that succumb to the fever, they eventually just focus on an activity. So one of the examples in the book is a sales lady in a department store who is just folding and refolding and refolding and refolding these sweaters that are on a table. And so, so it's just this repetitive action. No kind of, you can't really stop them from doing it. They just sort of do it in a blank way. And so Shin, I looked that up. So the Shin fever in the book starts in China, in a province like Hsinchu, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but so it sort of has that relationship. But when I looked it up on Google Translate, Shin actually means spirit or God. And so I take that to mean spirit fever. So as far as the social commentary aspect of this goes, I think, also based on a couple of other kind of clues from the book, that the fever itself is really trying to symbolize our alienation. So the people seem to pick some kind of activity to do whenever they have the fever is something that they've done in life, so it's something that's sort of meaningful to them. And they, I think that, so if you're alienated from your society, you might have some sort of activity that you do to sort of lessen that feeling of alienation. And then, so if you're so alienated that all you can do is that activity, then you would have Shin fever. So to me, that's kind of what the fever was trying to say. And then, sort of along those same lines, about the book cover. So this book cover, it has this sticker here that's like a file folder. So to me, this represents like her work in the publishing house. But then this pink carnation color, I don't know if you can see up here, but this makes it look like, it's a wall, maybe a pink wall. And from the book, it is a pink wall, a pink carnation wall. And I won't give away the specifics of it, but this pink carnation wall, as well as what happens at the facility, is sort of what made me think of this idea of Shin fever is people who have used something as a refuge from alienation and then became so alienated that that's all they can focus on, and then they succumb to Shin fever. So I won't give away why the pink wall and the facility mean that to me, but because that would kind of detract from the reading, but that's sort of what I took away from it. So then another kind of really cool thing before I run out of time is that the novel is actually set in 2011. The last part, like maybe late summer through early winter of 2012. So late summer of 2011 through early winter of 2012. And I think that I've thought a lot about, like, why would this book be set in the past? Like, and it's, maybe it's an alternative, universe or something like that. But I'm actually wondering if maybe the book was trying to say that we all have Shin fever, right? We don't know it, but the apocalypse already happened, but we're focused on our sort of distractions from alienation, and so we haven't realized that we have Shin fever. So I don't know. That's just my kind of takeaway from it as potentially a possibility. So I think I'll leave the chat at that. I'm not sure I did this book justice. Really, it was a really great read, and I think it did have a lot in there as far as social commentary of our current time. But yeah, those are sort of my takeaway thoughts. But my next chat is going to be The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. This book was actually mentioned in Severance. That's why I read it. So it will be my next chat. I've already finished this book, so I will have a chat on this coming up very soon. So until next time, take care. Bye.